Welcome to the PerfWeb podcast, hosted by Joe Basha.
Welcome to PerfWeb 97, day 3 of our 4-day series. My name is Thomas DiSalvio, and I am standing in for Joe Basha, who is busy doing an emergency case right now. And I'm here to facilitate his place. I know he's got some pretty big shoes, and I'm going to do the best I can to fill them. So we're going to start it off right now. We have contact us. We have contact at perfusioneducation.com. That's our email address. You can also contact us through any of the social media sites. And you can contact us on the phone. Our phone number is 832-239-5358. We are going to be having a scroll bar flashing across the bottom of your screen that you can also get all this information from. And if you're interested, you can contact us at any time. You can ask questions, especially about this webinar, because this is a really great webinar. Vicki Carlyle was supposed to be here today. She has also been called in on an emergency procedure. We are very busy and we're short-staffed. That's just the life of a perfusionist. So I'm going to be covering Vicki's talk. And Vicki will be giving the talk that she's going to give today. She'll be giving tomorrow. I'm going to do the talk that she's going to give tomorrow today. I have some pre-prepared presentations that I've done in the past that I'm going to try to work with to help us get through this. And I've got a pen so I can make changes anytime I need to. Do we have anything that we need to talk about? You can the podcast, yeah. I'm talking about the apps, yeah. We have a critical care app, and this is a very good app. I love to use this app. I use it all the time for every single case that I do. I put the information in and see out the information that I get back about the patient status and what to expect during the procedure. It's actually very good and very accurate. It's probably one of the best apps out there available to perfusionists and to critical care workers and doctors and medical people. If you are interested in listening on any past shows that we've done, you can go to the PerfWeb podcast series. It's available on all the major outlets that do podcasts like Amazon and all those things. And that's on you to figure that out. I've never done that before. So I guess we're ready to get started. And Vicki's talk was going to be on hemodynamic measurements. And so in 2011, I gave a talk to the Greater Houston Area Anesthesia Technicians Society. And I talked about Swan-Ganz and the measurements of pressures. And it's going to lead into my second talk, which is the pressure is on. And it's all about, they all relate together because the pressure in the heart is the number one thing that we're trying to preserve to keep the patient alive. And while we often have to fix arteries and stuff like that or other things around it, we can keep the pressure stable so that we keep the patient alive. Let's just go on into it. This is a diagram of the swan as we know it today. This is a cardiac output swan, thermal dilution swan. So it's got a lot of outlets and a lot of outputs on it. And I'm sure everybody's seen them before at the hospital. And but I'm always surprised at how many people really don't know where it goes and what it does. One thing I want to comment on, I guess, would be you'll see certain outlets, a PA distal outlet, you see a proximal outlet, you have a balloon. This is where the calculations for the cardiac output are done. And those are kind of the basic things about the balloon. This would be somewhere around the right atrium to the IVC. And the distal is usually, it's put into the PA, pushed into the PA and wedged. This is a picture of what the thermal dilution swan catheter looks like that I had at that time. And what I kind of put together a history back then, and so I'm trying to go a lot off of memory of this, but the Egyptians in 3000 BC are the first sort of known, we say sort of known, people to try to catheterize a human being. We have found, I say we, archaeologists have found bones that they think were hollowed out intentionally for the purpose of catheterization. And I don't know why they were catheterizing him. I don't know what they were doing, but that your guess is as good as mine because none of us were here back then. Around 400 BC, the Egyptians and the Asians, we found artifacts that show that they were also trying to put catheters into people's arms and legs and all kinds of places. Some important people in the history of the Swan-Ganz catheter. Claude Bernard in 1844. These are the first official people that actually we know did stuff. Claude Bernard, he was involved in catheterization. He was also involved in, let me look about fast, because I'm having to look back at a lot of what I wrote. He was doing cardiac output measurements using temperature, I think. And it is kind of an interesting story because this was a long time ago. And Adolf Fick, he's one of the founders of also, he was trying to do calculations for cardiac outputs. Fritz Blurger, at the time that I was doing this paper, I could not find a picture of him anywhere. But I just looked him up on the way here today and I found lots of pictures of him. So that's exciting. And this is Frederick E.B. Foley. His contribution to the modern Swan-Ganz was actually a Foley catheter. They used the Foley catheter, Werner Fossmann. He took a Foley catheter and he shoved it up his arm and he was downstairs. I think let me make sure I got the right guy. Yeah. He took a Foley catheter and he shoved it up his arm and he did this in a hidden room. Then he walked upstairs to the cath lab and he injected himself with contrast and he took a picture of it. Let's see if I have that picture. And there's the picture. And so that's Werner Fossmann. He was the first one. Yeah, this is the guy that did that. Since he took the first picture, he's the one who's credited with the first cardiac catheterization, even though we all know that, well, we don't know for sure, but we have strong suspicions that this all began. Humans have been trying this since 3000 BC. And this is an up-close picture of his x-ray that he took in 1926. Swan and Ganz, there was a lot of hypothesization about how to measure pulmonary pressures easily. And Swan, he was the one who came up with the idea. I think he's the one who came up with the idea to put the balloon on the end of it. And that was working. William Ganz had the idea to put a sail on the end of it. He would shoot out this sail and the sail would help drive it up. His idea never really worked, but because they were kind of collaborating, sort of. Remember, nobody ever really collaborated. They were all cheating against each other, fighting with each other and trying to cheat on each other. But William Ganz, he had the sail idea and Swan had the balloon idea. And the question that a lot of people, I find that a lot of people don't know, and maybe they should know because they've just never had somebody told them, I guess, but where does it actually go? And this is an example of where it goes. Typically, we would put it over here, though. But this one went into, looks like his left subclavian, and they pushed it down into his IVC, through his right atrium, floated it up into the right ventricle, and out the PA. And here's the up-close picture right here of where it's going. Normally, we'd be going down this way in the OR. And what we're doing as we float it along is we're measuring pressures in the right atrium, in the right ventricle, in the pulmonary artery, and then we're pushing it out as far as we can until it stops. And then we inflate the balloon and we measure whatever pressures on the other side of the balloon. So it's measuring backwards. And I may be cheating here, but what's on the other side of the balloon is the left atrium. And where the holes go is kind of important. So the holes are in this vicinity. So that's giving you a right atrial pressure or maybe a IVC pressure. And the other hole is the distal hole. So it's giving you a PA pressure. And there's not any other, there's only two holes that give you pressures. This is what the pressures look like. And normally, I don't really give it away this easily, but what you're looking at here is a right atrial pressure tracing. the right ventricular pressure tracing, the pulmonary artery pressure tracing, and the wedge tracing. And normally I make people guess. I don't just give you this slide, but if you look here on the left heart, what you're going to find is the right ventricle and the left ventricle have identical pressure waveforms. The pulmonary artery and the aortic artery have the exact same waveforms. The wedge, which is our, you can see it here, left atrial pressure, has the same waveform as the right atrial pressure. And the reason for that is their anatomy is very much the same. The right atrium and the left atrium do not have valves on the front side. So we're measuring pressure. What we get is two waveforms. We get a bump, and then we get another bump. And so they call this the A wave, and this is the V wave. This A wave is the push of the atrium when it squeezes. So it builds up a lot of pressure, and all the blood gets shot out. And there's a C wave right here usually, gets shot out. And when that C wave happens, that's the valve opening, and the blood goes through the valve, the tricuspid valve or the mitral valve, and it goes into the left ventricle or the right ventricle, depending upon which atria we're in. And now the blood is out in is in the left ventricle or the right ventricle, but this still has the V wave because it's going to fill back up. And when it fills back up, it's registered as another pulse up. And just to let you know, if there was a problem with this valve here, with the valve that when the blood is coming out of the atrium, so let me try and draw this for you. So the blood's going this direction. If there's a problem with this valve right here, if it's stenosis, your A wave will be much bigger, and then your V wave would be of the regular size. If there is regurgitant flow backwards, you would have a larger V wave. And so you could have a small A wave because it's normal, and then a large V wave. You could have large A wave, large V wave. You could have a large A wave, small V wave. And it's all about this valve right here that's telling you the size of those bumps. And you can see what's interesting about this is that the atrium, whether it's the left atrium or the right atrium, have the same waveform because they do not have a valve on this side. The right atrium has an IVC and an SVC, and the left atrium has, how to draw this? The pulmonary veins that are coming in from here. And so your right atrium would have the IVC and the SVC coming in here. And whenever the blood gets into the right ventricle begins to contract. And because it's generally empty, and it should be empty, the left ventricle and the right ventricle, they almost completely eject all of their volume. They almost completely do. So they start off completely empty, and there's a large rise in pressure as the ventricles squeeze. When they squeeze to a certain point, there's an opening of the valve, and it's either the PA valve for the right side, and for the left side, it would be the aortic valve. And when you see that notch right there and right there, that's where the valve opened at. So you have this flattening off of pressure, and then the valve opens, and then a quick drop of pressure inside of the ventricle itself. And the ventricle will empty all the way down to the bottom. And then there's a moment of pause where it's done emptying, and there's a pause where it starts to rise up right here. And so during that pause, that is actually considered to be your end diastolic volume, what you really ended up with left over at the bottom. And where I'm going with this, should I tell you now or not? Let's wait and see. I don't have access to these things anymore, so I can't give you those. And that was the end of that slide, so let's go back. Next. So I'm going to give you some quick information on the pressures. Perfusionists live and die by filling pressures. And that's probably the most important takeaway from what we do from the information I just gave you. And I'm curious, does anybody have any answers? Maybe there are 5 pressures. Let's do it this way first. I don't know how to erase this stuff, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But the aspects of the waveform are really important. So like when I said, you have your A, C, V wave in your atrium. You have your filling and your ejection and your filling pressure, ejection and filling. They're really small. So for our purposes, as perfusionists, as people in the OR, we take a mean. And the mean kind of moves around a little bit, but it doesn't move that much. And we don't worry about having a systolic or a diastolic. We just take the mean, and that's our one number that we go with for both the, let me write this down right, the right atrium and the left atrium. We're just going to take means. For the ventricles, when they have their firing, they start off at a diastole. They go up, they come down, they go to the bottom, then you have your true end diastolic volume right here. This would be systole, and this right here would be diastole. And diastole is said as usually like 2 numbers. It's whatever this bottom number is to whatever this number is. So it's like 0 to like 8. For the aortic and pulmonary pressure waveforms, they come up, high pressure while the blood is being shot into them, or they're shooting blood out of them. They come down, the valve closes. This is a closing of a valve. And it's the valve that's on the other side of them. It's the PA valve or it's the aortic valve that's closing. And then there's a rapid pressure drop inside of the lumen of the aorta or the PA. And so this is systole and this is diastole down here. And we don't really count the aortic notch as a waveform. But we now have, I've given you, let's do like this. We got right atrium, left atrium. Let's do like this. Left atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle, and aorta and PA. So now that I've told you kind of a little bit about them, what we need to know is what determines when the heart is full or when the aorta or PA are full. And that's the number we want to worry about the most when they're supposed to be empty. We call that end diastole. We call that filling pressures. And it's important to know because if those numbers are high, that means that the heart never fully ejected. And if the heart never fully ejected, when it goes to fill back up again, it's going to overstress the walls of the heart while it's trying to fill, and you're liable to end up with a failure at some point, at an upcoming point. And I try to explain to people a couple things. The left atrial pressure is the same thing as wedge pressure. The right atrial pressure is the same thing as CVP. Some people might try to argue with that, but just take it for what it is. It's a CVP. Left ventricular end diastolic pressure and right ventricular end diastolic pressure. Then when you go and you look at these numbers in the books, you're going to find things that seem really low, because when you're in the heart surgery room, you start seeing numbers that are a lot higher, and it's kind of confusing. And I made up a theory on this. My theory is that when they first found out about swans, they went and they looked for volunteers, and to test their theories, to get numbers and find out what normal was. Well, where did they go to get these volunteers? It was probably the local colleges, and you got a bunch of poor kids that are willing to let people do some pretty dangerous things to them for money, but they just happen to be young and healthy. And so the numbers that you get, and I made this up. You won't find this in any book anywhere. I made this up. Because they were young and healthy, they had lower pressures. And when you get older and you become a sicker condition, your pressures change. They become higher. And what your body's used to becomes higher. And it does change a lot. So when you're trying to maintain, say, a CVP of 8, because that's what you're told in the books when you're coming off bypass, you're way too low and you're underfilled. So that's another thing. When we look at these numbers, the numbers are guides. And while they're very accurate, the numbers are just guides. And the ultimate answer is always visualization. Oh, hey, Becky.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Am I doing okay?
Yes, you are doing great.
Do you have anything you want to add?
What's that?
Do you want to add anything you know, but that I haven't covered?
I just joined, so I'm listening.
Okay. So the number one most important thing about these numbers is they're guides. And while they're very accurate and you can come off bypass using these numbers, the ultimate answer is always visualization of the heart, direct visualization. And so you got to throw the numbers to the wayside. And it's sometimes direct visualization can also be through the TEE. And so when we're coming off pump, a lot of times we'll have some pretty high numbers, like say 50/30 on your PAs. And people, I'll look at the surgeon and say, give 100 volume. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, hey, the PA is 50/30. And he looks at me and he says, don't worry about it. I'm looking at the heart and I can tell it's empty. So not always are the numbers going to be that correct. But I do need to kind of give you, I guess, what normal numbers would be. But I don't have access to see comments or anything like that. But I was curious about let me do this. Let's make some space here so I can draw and draw around here. Does anybody have any opinions on what normal numbers would be? And what we'll do is let's start with the right atrium. And we'll move to the right ventricle. And then from there, we'll move to the PA. And from there, we're going to move to the left atrium. And from there, we're going to move to the left ventricle. And from here, we're going to move to the aorta. So my big question for everybody that's watching today, if anybody has any input or opinions based on your experiences and also what you've read in books, you can choose either way. Tell me what you think normal numbers would be for the right atrial pressure. And remember, right atrial pressure is also CBP. Do we have access to seeing that information? Okay. Okay. I don't have a little screen, so I don't. Anybody? Not yet. Does anybody want to try? Give us a like and subscribe if you're thinking about it, if you don't want to give it a try. Nobody? Becky, do you have any input? I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're the only one here. You're.
No, I don't have any input.
Okay. So what do you think a normal CVP would be? Becky.
Oh.
Yes, you.
Around 8.
Yeah. So in the books, it's 8, right? Mm-hmm. Let's go and move down. What do you think a normal RV, right ventricular pressure, would be in the books?
In the book.
Yeah. Like in the textbooks.
I don't know.
It's usually around.
What book are you referring to?
Any book. If you look at the textbook.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I'm sorry. Look, I'm coming in. Sorry, I'm coming in the middle of it. I don't know what we're talking about. Balloon pumps. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We did that yesterday.
Oh, okay. What are we talking about right now?
Pressures, filling pressures in the heart.
Pressures, got it.
So our question is, what are normal right ventricular pressures in the textbook? Anybody? That's honestly a little low. I think it's more like in the 8 to 14 systolic over 0 to like 3, somewhere around there. That's what textbook would tell you. They're pretty low. And so if you have an 8 to 14 right ventricular pressure, maybe let's go as high as 20, just for grins. If you had an 8 to 20 systolic pressure in the right ventricle, what should your systolic pressure be in your pulmonary artery? The same number. Whatever your systolic in the RV is, your PA should be that same systolic. Now, since the PA is not an open vessel that completely empties, it always has fluid in it, it's going to have a diastolic number that is not 0. It's going to have a higher number. So, they usually run about, let's say, it'd be 20/10 and probably 8/4. And that's pretty dry, actually, even for normal people. But say 20/10, and so it'd be 20/3 for your right ventricle, 0 to 3 for your right ventricle. For your left atrium, anybody have any guesses on what the pressures would be? Oh, cool. Thank you. They're higher than the right atrium, just so you know that. So this is probably going to be like 14 or 15 on the textbooks, because it's a mean, 14 to 15. And then your left ventricular pressures in the textbooks, they generally run like 100/0 to like 4 maybe. And then the aorta in the textbooks, because you have a systole of 100, you'd have 100 systole on your aorta, and it would be over, and it's probably going to be over like 60, and maybe even lower, because these are young people that have compliant vessels, so they stretch better, and they're not stiff with cardiovascular disease, stenosis and stuff like that. So in the book, they're pretty low. In real life, when you're operating on patients, first off, when we're operating on a patient, the only thing we can see is the right ventricle. You can't see the left ventricle. And that's probably a good thing, because I don't want to say the left ventricle never fails first, but it almost never fails first. If you're going to have a problem, it's going to be with the right ventricle. If the overload is going to happen first in the right ventricle, the cause may be, say, an LAD, which is affecting the left ventricle, but the right will fall down first. So you want to be able to see the right ventricle and make sure that it's moving and make sure that it's properly ejecting. Because if it's ejecting, most likely the left ventricle is ejecting. And that's just kind of an important thing to know. So normal CVPs in our patients are actually quite a bit higher. So CVP, or right atrial pressure, it's usually in the 14 to say 20 area. And right ventricular pressures are usually 40 over, and they're a little bit higher. Sometimes it's like 3 or 4 for the actual bottom diastolic number. And then the upper number is usually around 8 or 10. Sorry. We're all pretty sick today. And if the right ventricle pressure systole is 40, your PA systole will be 40. 40/20. And then we'll get to the CVP, which we already did over here. Let me get some water. Yeah. So now that we know kind of what normal pressures are, what we're going to ask ourselves is, what is the filling pressure? And one of the biggest things is, since we can see the right atrium and the PAs are the most important because they're going to fail first. Filling pressures for the heart, there's 5 of them. And they tell you when your heart is empty enough, if it's not retaining fluid, like if you properly ejected all the volume out of it. And the 5 filling pressures are, I'm just going to give it to you. CVP, which is also right atrium. Left atrium, which is also wedge. The pulmonary artery diastole. And I got CVP, wedge, and then the LV EDP and the RV EDP. We don't have catheters in the left ventricle, and we don't have catheters in the right ventricle. So we cannot measure those pressures during bypass. We do have the ability to do a wedge, usually if we're using a swan, but if we're not, then we don't. But typically the swan is left in the pulmonary artery anyway, so we can knock that one out. We always have a CVP when we do heart surgery because we always have a central line in. So we at least have a CVP. So we know we've got that. And if we are using a swan, we will have access to the pulmonary artery diastolic pressure. And this is where the controversy happens. Many times I've been told by an anesthesiologist to make the PA 40. And what that means is they did not get my lecture. What that means is they want me to have a systolic of 40 and a diastolic of 20. And you just have to know this because you've done enough cases where you know this. All that systole means is that the heart ejected. It doesn't mean anything. It could just as easily be 35 over 20 as it could be 45 over 20. So the systole number does not matter. All that matters is pulmonary artery diastolic. The mean number does not matter. I go over and over this with people, and I get a lot of people that they swear up and down, no, it's the mean. No, I'm telling you, the answer is PA diastolic. So when you have the luxury of using a swan gans, you want to focus on your pulmonary artery diastole. And you want that number to be 20 or less. And it's usually going to be, and I don't mean much less, it's usually going to be 16 to 20. It's going to be your diastolic. And this is confirmed by visualization. And that's because remember, visualization is always the most important thing. So the reason I use pulmonary artery diastolic as my primary number versus using the CVP, which is going to be somewhere around, say, 16 to 20, before it confirms that it's properly filled, is because the CVP, in my opinion, and based on my experience, it lags. It does this. It goes through waves. And you never know what part of the wave you're on. You could be getting a 16, but it's on the wave up. And you could be getting a 20 and it's on the wave down. So you think it's too high because it's reading 20, but it's really not because it's on the way down and the numbers just haven't caught up with it yet. So you're really probably more like 18 or 16. And then when you're reading a 16, you may not actually be 16, you may be closer to 20. And so that's why I prefer to use PA diastolic. PA diastolic is a second by second, very accurate number. It tells you exactly how full that the right heart is second by second. There's no wandering around and it works great. Now, that would lead to the question of why don't we use swans on every single patient? And the answer is, there's a couple of answers that I've come up with. And I think the first answer is it costs money to put a swan in. They're expensive. And if you can cut costs and get away with using a central line, just a little line in your jugular, then a lot of people will do that. And it's accurate enough. However, if you have a sick patient, with a low ejection fraction, and then you know that you should consider putting in a swan and take the cost of it. There are risks for putting in a swan. The patient can fibrillate whenever whenever it's going in because it tickles the pulmonary valve and it can fibrillate the patient. You can also have extra bleeding. You can miss. You can poke the carotid instead of actually hitting the jugular. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but with the experience that we have nowadays, and I think the quality of personnel, anesthesia personnel that's coming out, they're very good and they don't mess up that much. And if you have a sick patient, you definitely want to opt for the swan because you want the PA pressure, PA diastolic pressure. You want to know what that is. And then you want to also remember that just because I say PA diastolic should be 16 to 20, you have to visualize it. You have to see it. And I'll often come off at 16 on purpose. I come off underfilled and I let the doctors tell me to give volume. And this is one point I wanted to make too. The typical answer that a doctor tells you is, give me 100 of volume, either anesthesia or your surgeon. And I just feel like that you need to understand what give 100 of volume means. Give 100 of volume does not mean give 100 cc's of volume. What it means is give me volume. The heart is empty. or it's a little empty. And the average person, 100 cc's of volume will elicit a response. And from there, we can decide to give another 100 cc's, or we can decide to hold off, or we can start saying, we're not seeing that good of a response. Let's work on inotrope support. And so it gives you a chance to do things. Now, having said that, there's been plenty of times whenever I start to give volume and I've got a CBP of say 18, a PA diastolic pressure of 18, and I've only given 50 cc's and suddenly the diastolic jumps to 25. Because remember, I'm pinned on that diastolic number, that PA diastolic, because I know that's the filling pressure of the right heart. And I know that if I blow this, then this patient's going to end up on a balloon pump or an Impella or an ECMO. So I see this thing jump immediately to 25, and I've only given 50 cc's of volume. I stop. Just because the surgeon said to give 100 cc's of volume does not mean you give 100 cc's of volume. It means give me volume because we're a little empty. So now we've had this big jump in pressure. I stop and I tell them exactly how much I gave. That's 50 cc's of volume in. And I don't make excuses. I don't say it's 100, and I don't lie. I give them exactly the number. That's 50 cc's in. And then they turn around and they look at me, and they'll look up at the monitor and they'll see the numbers, and then they'll look at the anesthesiologist. And if the numbers are lying because heart's actually empty, they'll say, hey, don't worry about it. It looks pretty empty up here. Go ahead and give 100. And at that point, I'll give another 100. And I never give more than 200 in a row. I always stop at 200 because once I've given 200 cc's, anything can happen after that, because anesthesia can be treating for these, can be given constrictors. And these constrictors are happening, squeezing blood into the heart, and you're giving blood into the heart. And that's a double whammy that will knock your PA to like, 50 over 30 or 60 over 40. And that's heart failure zones. So, and it's your fault because you gave the volume. So I never give more than 200 cc's of volume, and I never lie. So if I start giving volume and 100 cc's goes in and it doesn't budge the pressure, I will say that's 100 in, giving another 100. And that gives everybody in the room a chance to know that the patient handled the volume very well, the heart's strong, and everything's looking good. But it also gives the surgeon a chance to turn around and say, no, let's go ahead and hold here. And a good example was the other day, I wasn't told to give 400. It was at the same time when he was telling me to give volume, the surgeon was telling me to give volume, he got distracted and was telling the anesthesiologist another number. And he said, give 400. And I looked at him and I said, okay, giving volume, but I don't touch the clamp. Because I know that that's a lot of volume to give, and I'm not going to do it. And even if I do start doing it, I won't give over 100 on this one because I'm going to be pinned on that PA pressure. Well, of course, we didn't have a PA. We had a CVP. But I'm going to be pinned on that CVP at this point. And knowing that I don't trust CVPs, and you should never trust a CVP because you don't know where you're at on the curve. And at that moment in time, he heard me say, I said, okay, give him the volume. And he turned around and he goes, no, not you. And I was like, that's what I thought, because that's why I'm not touching the clamp, and that's why I'm going so slow, and why I'm not intentionally just run over there and grab the clamp and give it, because that's irresponsible as a perfusionist. It's one thing to do what you're told. It's another to know that you shouldn't do something. And there's been plenty of times when an anesthesiologist has been distracted and the surgeon is distracted, and the surgeon's doing his thing, and he looks up, he sees a pressure, an aortic pressure of say 90 over like say 50. And he'll immediately go, give 100 of volume. Now, he didn't look at all the numbers, and the anesthesiologist is distracted. I'm looking at the numbers, and I see the PA pressure is 50 over 30. Am I going to give that 100 cc's of volume? Becky? Am I going to give 100 cc's of volume? No, I'm not. I'm going to stand there and I'm going to say, the PA is 50 over 30. And then the surgeon's going to turn around and look at me, and they often get mad. They're like, how dare you not do what I said? And then they look at the numbers and they see the numbers and they're like, oh. Then they look down at the heart and they realize the heart is full. And then they look at the anesthesiologist, and now it's the anesthesiologist's fault. But the most important thing is that you actually save that patient a VAD, you know? These are all the things I think about whenever I'm dealing with pressures. And I hope that Vicky's lecture was going to cover this kind of stuff, because, you know, it's one thing to get this lecture from the nursing perspective. It's a whole nother perspective from the perfusionist, where I live and die by filling pressures. I get to keep my job because I don't overfill a patient's heart. And I believe that as a perfusionist, we get paid to wean from bypass. And weaning from bypass involves filling pressures. And that's the end of this lecture. Does anybody have any comments? Oh, my laptop over here. Here you are. So some of the comments are a couple comments that, well, 2 comments by the same person. LV failure is more common than right ventricular failure. So LV failure, from my experience, well, you know, in the OR, these patients have already had grafts put on, and so they've been revascularized. Your LV is getting blood, oxygenated blood, and there are things, it's called reperfusion injury. You can have a reperfusion injury, and that can be part of the problem. You can also, that can, with the LV failing, can bring down the RV, but the RV will go down faster than the LV. It's just going to back up to the RV and then take the RV down. What do you think? Yeah. So in my experience, you know, LV may be the problem, but the LV is going to take the RV down first. Okay. And Becky, I know you're being really quiet because you just got here and you're being put on the spot. Do you have any comments on filling pressures?
No, I mean, you know, you covered a lot, and I pretty much follow what you do using the rule of 20, and I'm comfortable with that.
So since you've worked all over, well, you've worked in the Northeast, my big question for you is, how many people were using mean PA pressures and trying to call that a filling pressure, or giving you systolic numbers and trying to say that that's your filling pressure for your pulmonary artery?
I'm sorry, what is your question? Because I worked where?
Because you worked in the Northeast, you've been around a lot. You've seen a lot of different surgeons,
yes,
and anesthesiologists. How many of them are using what I consider to be the wrong pressure numbers? Because, you know, I consider PAD, pulmonary artery diastolic pressure, to be the filling pressure. CPP is there, but it's not the number. The number is pulmonary artery diastolic. Do you have other surgeons using mean pulmonary artery pressures, or maybe telling you a systolic pressure to maintain?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen both of them using different things, but mostly we use just visualization, as you mentioned before, with seeing if the heart's full and how it's ejecting, and checking the TEE. And
yeah, check the TEE. I mean, that's really all you can do. Visualization is number one. But I hope that gave a good. I hope that went well, and I hope that Vicky would be proud of me for being accurate on those pressures. The next talk is actually my talk, and I call it the Pressures On. And the reason I call it the Pressures On is because whenever we wean from cardiopulmonary bypass, that is where we make our money at. Anybody can go on bypass, and anybody can suffer through a case, and patients still live one way or the other. But when you're coming off bypass, you really need to know your filling pressures. Let me see if I can do this. So one thing I say is that all I really need to know, I learned in kindergarten. And the reason I put that slide on here, this is also an older program that I did. So we're going to try to do some, I don't know if I can make these slides work, but everything we learned in kindergarten. And that means that in basic anatomy and physiology, that's really where everything's at. I mean, all these advanced techniques and stuff, they come from just basic anatomy and physiology. And, you know, it all starts with the muscle. And I can't make this work. It's not going to work. That's okay. I can tell you about it. It all starts with the muscle. And I have some really good actin myosin filament diagrams coming up. But you've got a myosin filament. Let's see. You got actin in the middle and myosin on the outside. And you've got these things that look like little feet. And that's what moves a muscle. And you have ATP supplying energy for this to happen. You have calcium also being used to pump in and out the ATPs. And what's important, we'll get to what's important about the calcium here in a little bit. But does everybody remember their actin myosin fiber sliding filament theory? Because the heart muscle, it's smooth muscle and it's different, but it's really similar. And it's still doing the same thing. And I'm going to see when here. It's all supplied by the Krebs cycle and then the electron pathway. And so the Krebs cycle delivers, I don't remember, it's like 6 ATP or 3 ATP, something like that. And then if there's oxygen present, you'll go down the electron transport pathway and you'll deliver, I think it was like 32 electrons. I don't know, it's like 32. I don't remember for sure, but that's okay. 32 ATP. And so that means there's a lot of energy available for a muscle cell to work with if there's oxygen. If there's not oxygen, then you only get 6 ATP, but you also get acid released. And one thing, whenever I think acid or when people say acid, I immediately say hydrogen atoms, hydrogen ions. And these are my references. If you ever see these things at the bottom, I pulled all this stuff off the internet just because it's easier to have them draw the pictures. They do a better job of it than I do. But I do go ahead and put references there so that I'm not gonna get in trouble for it. This was a great video that showed the the sliding filament theory. But we made it work. Nope, not gonna work. Failed an error. Let me see if I can do it.
If you're taking anatomy and physiology for the first time, I can guarantee it's not like any course that you've ever taken. And that's why so
the cardiac muscle tissue contract in an organized, wave-like pattern. This muscle tissue control is involuntary. Then explore, check out our video description. Okay, so we have actin, thin filaments. We have myosin, thick filaments. We have these Z lines here where a sarcomere ends, and these Z lines are where the thin filaments attach. The thick filaments are held by accessory proteins in this area called the M line. The big, super important concept here is this. The sarcomere must shorten for muscles to contract, but the thick and thin filaments themselves do not shorten. So the way that is going to happen is that we're going to slide past each other, and they do. When the sarcomere contracts, the thin filaments will be pulled by the thick filaments towards the center. There is overlap of the thin and thick filaments. Z lines will be moved closer together. How are they doing that? So let's zoom into this here. Showing a thin filament on top, that's actin, thick filament on bottom, that's myosin. Myosin has structures here called myosin heads. Hundreds of them actually, but we're just going to focus on one. And here we show the myosin head is bound to ATP. It hydrolyzes the ATP. Remember, hydrolyzing results in ADP and a phosphate, which are both still bound to the myosin head. The myosin head can now bind to the actin. We call this a cross bridge. The myosin head performs a power stroke, which will also involve the release of ATP and the phosphate. Power stroke meaning the thin filament slides towards that sarcomere center. A new ATP molecule binds the myosin head, and that is what lets the myosin head detach. Without ATP, the myosin head would not detach. And this is actually the reason for rigor mortis, how muscles can be rigid after an organism dies, is the organism is no longer producing ATP. ATP is needed for the myosin to separate from the actin. So during muscle contraction, you can imagine all these hundreds of cross bridges forming and breaking and power strokes happening in each sarcomere throughout the time of a muscle contraction. It's popular in bio to compare the myosin heads to tiny little oars of a boat, and because there would be some attached at any given time during a contraction, it prevents the actin from slipping back to its original position. But there's more. A muscle isn't always contracting. There is regulation in that it's not just cycle after cycle. A lot of this regulation involves the ability of the myosin heads to bind to the actin in the first place. The actin has something called tropomyosin on it. It's a regulatory protein, and it blocks the myosin binding sites on the actin. We're drawing it like a ribbon here, blocking sites. Another thing called troponin, or really a troponin complex, is a set of more regulatory proteins. Together, these regulatory proteins block those myosin binding sites. And if the myosin doesn't bind the actin, the muscle can't contract because that thin filament isn't going to be sliding. But when a neuron stimulates a muscle, it can trigger a release of calcium, and those little calcium ions bind to the troponin. The troponin has a conformational change, and this lets the tropomyosin move off the myosin binding sites. Now the myosin heads can bind. Pretty fascinating way to regulate. Next time you pick up that biology text.
Okay, let's see if I can go back to where we were. There's a couple things on there that I think are really interesting. Besides, pretty much everybody knows about the actin-myosin filament, sliding filament theory. The big thing there is that the importance of calcium. And you'll see sometimes whenever an anesthesiologist will hand you some calcium to give, and then you'll see the pressures go up. Or maybe after bypass, they give calcium and the pressures go up. It's because there's suddenly a lot of calcium available to help the muscle contraction. And that's one, let me see if I can find this thing back here. We're going to need to pull the talk back up. How do we get out of here? Ooh. Nope. There we go. So the big thing about the amoeba sisters that I wanted you to see was how the sliding filaments go together, because let's see if I can pull this out here. We're getting into Frank Starling's curve. And I just pulled this up off the internet. I think I forgot to cite this one, but at least it's got a thing on the bottom of it. The most important thing about Frank Starling's curve, and I want everybody to understand, is while you've got a sliding filament going like this, it's a lot like a rubber band. And when you take a rubber band and you pull it a little bit farther back and let go of it, it'll snap back. So whenever you take that same rubber band and you pull it too far and it overstretches the rubber band and the rubber band bonds break, when you let go, it just kind of snaps back like this. And it'll never snap fully back again. And that's what Frank Starling's curve is all about. It's about stretching the muscle to the point where it will come back. And so you have the mechanical contraction, which is the actin-myosin fiber bonds moving, sliding across each other. But also when you overstretch them, they'll come back with an even more force because they've been stretched and they want to come back farther. But the moment that you, let's see if I can do this, the moment that you overstretch them like this, once they've lost contact, that is congestive heart failure. That's heart failure at a point where the binds have been broken and it's very hard to recover from that. So let's see if I can pull this out. I'm not going to be able to. What I wanted to show here was she equated it to like oars on a boat. I kind of think of it like a train on train tracks. And this is what it would look. Let me see. Let's just go here. So I drew this for you. This is my drawings. Don't have to cite them, which is great. In a normal contraction, you can see that this is a relaxed state of the muscle right here. And these lines come together towards the center, the M line, and that's a contraction. And during the relaxation phase, they come back out and they come back to, I wish I could have done this better, but this one is too small. But they come back out to the same place where they were at the beginning of the contraction. When you apply a slight stretch, what you get is a little bit farther out with the same drive forward for the contraction. So the muscle is able to contract a little bit harder. When you overstretch the myocardium, you started off here and you had a stretch and you went off the tracks. When it tries to come back together, it never comes back as far. So here it was all the way over to here. Now it's only over to here. And when it stretches out again, it stretches out and sometimes farther. I mean, the bottom line is the muscle has been damaged and it's trying to get back on its tracks and it can't. And that's related to the volume overload. And that's why I'm so big on filling pressures. And I talk about that a lot. And why I'm really focused on the filling pressure numbers and why I like to teach filling pressures is because our job as perfusionists is it's very easy to overfill a heart and get in trouble for it. And it's also very easy to not overfill a heart because if you know the numbers and if you just stay within those parameters, this kind of a thing will not happen to you because that's bad. We don't like that. Let's write big no. This is a picture of the room. There was some stuff written down here that I talked about. Let me see if I have them here. This was a picture of a Swan-Ganz insertion so you can see the pressure changes. This is the right-sided pressures. I don't remember why I put that picture there. This was a tandem heart that we had put on a patient. And one of the good indications that you're going to be able to make it off pump is whenever you are maintaining a good blood pressure as you start pushing volume into the patient. And you can practice a little, you can hold some volume in the patient and see if the blood pressure maintains that pressure. There was a surgeon that I worked with a long time ago, and he said that any patient can make it to two liters. It's when you get below 2 liters where it really matters. It seems to me like lately at the places I work at, we come down pretty well. But I think that's a testament to the anesthesia taking over the hearts, given drugs early on to stimulate the heart. Let me see what I have here. So there's a couple things that I did want to talk about, and that's norepi versus neo and calcium. So I've already talked about calcium, and you can see that calcium is important for strengthening the contractions and or even having a contraction. The question that I often ask people is, what do you use? Do you use norepi or do you use neo? So let me get this right. Neo is phenylephrine and norepi is levophed. And whenever I go to different facilities, they always give me different stuff. And the question is, when should you use what? And does it matter? And I actually have kind of formed a hypothesis on it. And my hypothesis is that, let me try to describe this. Let's go back one. Let's go. No. There are 4 categories of drugs for heart surgery, for perfusionists. We have constrictors, we have dilators, we have inotropes, which are contractors, and we have the ability to give volume or take volume back. So there's 4 things that we can do. And when you're talking about neo versus norepi, neo is a straight constrictor, and it only does constriction. So when you're on bypass, you can give neo and you won't have any problems. When the clamp is off and when you're weaning from bypass, you could still give neo. I have opinions about that, so we'll cover those in just a second. But it will not, it's just going to squeeze. It's just going to be a constrictor. Norepi is very dangerous when you're coming off bypass. And the reason it's dangerous is because it is also a contractor. It is a squeezer and a contractor. And if you are coming off bypass and you're giving little shots of norepi to support the pressure, what you're doing is giving anesthesia a false sense of comfort because they don't know what you're doing and they aren't ready for it. And when you come off bypass, as soon as you clamp those lines, there's no longer you give them those little blasts of norepi, which were supporting the heart via contractors. And they get surprised and suddenly the pressure drops. And I've walked into rooms where people had done this and the patients were on balloon pump. And I'm like, well, they're wrong. And they're like, I don't know. And then I find out that they were given norepi while they were coming off a bypass and they weren't telling the anesthesiologist. And that's where a long time ago I passed a law for myself. It's a law. A lot of my things are guidelines, but this is an actual law. From the time where I think we're about to come up bypass in about 5 or 10 minutes, I refuse to give drugs. I don't want any part of it. The cross clamp's off. We're going along on bypass, and I tell anesthesia, I give them back their drugs that they gave me. I give them back their Neo, and I give them back their Levofed, so they physically know that I do not have it anymore. And that way, they are fully responsible for it. Because when we come off bypass, I don't want anybody looking at me and saying, "Were you given drugs?" Because we didn't know about it, and now we're on balloon pump, and we didn't have to be. And that's the important key. The key words there. We didn't have to be. Because if we had known, we would have given these drugs ahead of time and we would have started our own drips. So that's one thing I want to talk about, Neo versus norepi. And just think about that, because if you're using norepi, you can use either one, and I don't care which one you use. I don't care which one I use. I'll use them both, but I will not give any drugs at all in the 5 to 10 minute time period when we're coming off a pump, when I know we're going to come off a pump, because that's going to cause problems. I told you that the drugs that we use in perfusion, volume is a drug. I consider volume a drug. So are we going to need to give volume or are we going to need to take it back? And that is directly dependent upon filling pressures. And I see so many people get their filling pressures wrong all the time. And I feel bad because I don't know where they got their information from. And filling pressures are where perfusionists live and die. That's where you keep your job at. And I just can't emphasize that enough. You got to be really careful with your volume. And then when you've given a certain amount of volume and the heart's full, now you got to move on to inotropes. And I know an inotrope is not necessarily, mechanical support is not the literal definition of an inotrope, because an inotrope is more of a drug. I get it. But these are they're just like inotropes, Impella, balloon pump, and ECMO. They're a mechanical inotrope, I guess, but that's my terminology for them. And then, vasodilators and constrictors. And vasodilators and constrictors come right back to filling pressures. So for the weaning of bypass, the most important things are filling pressures. And your arsenal is vasodilators, constrictors, and volume. Lastly, your anesthesiologist, they have their arsenal, which is you giving volume or you having to go bring the hardware in. And then one thing I was thinking of that I did not include written down in this conversation was, and it's kind of important, it's cool. A lot of people have different acronyms for things that they want to know before they come off bypass. And since this talk is about weaning from bypass, I also want to discuss that. Becky, I have a question for you. Do you have any particular system of things that you look at before you come off bypass? So you're going to come off bypass, or you're ready to come off bypass. What are your checks? Do you have any checks?
Sure. Yeah, we're looking at pressures. We're looking at EKG. We're looking at I'm not looking at the TE, but anesthesia is. I'm paying attention to my volume, my flow, like all of those things. So yeah, I'm taking it all in.
Yeah. Some people have really neat acronyms. Like I can't remember, one of my friends, it was like a bunch of V's, and it was like, do I have enough volume? Is the ventilator going? Is my gas off? And I don't remember why, but V was some kind of a gas that they were using. And so that was the V there. My big 4 things are, of course, temperature, Are we warm enough to come off bypass? Because a lot of times the surgeon's ready to go, but I'm sorry, I started warming late. It's my bad, but I don't really, I want to make sure you're aware that we're 35.6 degrees. We are not 36.5 yet. And can we stand a little bit longer and warm up? And also during that time period, maybe give the heart a chance to rest some more. But temperature, do we have enough volume? What is our hematocrit and hemoglobin? Yikes. And potassium. And going along with potassium base excess, are we ready to come off? Are we balanced coming off? And so before you come off bypass, when the surgeon says, all right, start coming down, which happens all the time, the immediate response by everybody is to start coming down. And I'd like for everybody to think in their head and develop a checklist. Before you come up bypass, you're not allowed to touch any clamps until you say, okay, is the temperature good? Are we ventilating? Do I have enough volume? How's our potassium? How's our base excess? Is my SIVO or my fluorine off? My sulforine, is that turned off? Does it need to be turned off? If I turned off my sampling ports, or it's whatever your checklist. You could make it be a lot of different things. I mean, my big four are right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's 4. Those are my big things that I look at because I've already looked over anesthesia and seen them ventilating. I've already kind of know that I've got enough volume. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm really trying hard to do this. And if anybody can do this, that would be great. We've been talking about SVR. Before you come off bypass, you need to have an SVR of 1,000. And there's a calculation for it. And it's a really long calculation. And there's no way I'm going to sit there on my calculator trying to figure this thing out. The big component of it involves blood flow and blood pressure. And I'm trying to find a way to take just these two components and make it tell me what my SVR is. And I know Joe has this fancy way of doing it, and he told me it, and I just can't remember it. And it's frustrating because it's so important. I really want to try to start using this because I can tell you when I'm not going to make it off bypass. And it's not because I know my SVR, it's because I just have experience. But if I had the ability to calculate that SVR, and using these two numbers, he does something with, oh, hi, Joe. Welcome to the talk. We're talking about you.
How are you?
I'm good.
Well, hi, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Well, hopefully not everybody's sick like we all are. We'll have a cold.
I know. It's dreadful. But anyway, I was listening to you. So basically, the formula for SVR calculation is mean arterial pressure minus CVP times 79.9 divided by the cardiac output. So MAP minus CVP times 79.9 divided by cardiac output. Yeah. So what I do is
I was trying to find a way.
So I'm on bypass, right? And there's I think a reasonable assumption the CVP is 0. You're on full bypass.
Right.
I take the mean arterial pressure, multiply it by 80, and just basically 8 really is what I do, and then divide it by the cardiac output. So just hypothetically, you have a pressure of 80, and your CVP is 0, so it's 80. 8/8 or 64 divided by the cardiac output. Let's say I'm flowing 5 liters. I know my SVR is going to be somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200. Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. So I still have to do math, though. Okay.
Well,
I'm working on coming up with a chart where maybe I can get I can get a mean arterial pressure.
Well, 8 times 8 is 64, right?
Yes.
So just put 64. Don't multiply by 79.9. Multiply by 80. So just put 64. Then you divide 5.0 into that. 5 goes into 6 one time, and then 5 goes into 14, like 3 times. But it's probably it's about 1,300.
Okay.
1,200 to 1,300.
So I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I was so impressed when you showed me that. Because it gave me an actual number to credit what my...
Thank God you're easy to impress.
Yeah. No, I've learned so much from you, Joe. I just don't even know where to begin. I mean, it's like taking my what I thought I knew and brought it under a whole new perspective. But
well, I mean, I think that I've learned a lot from you too, and I've learned a lot from Becky. I think the whole thing, if I know it's getting off topic, I'm going to let you continue with your lecture, but the whole idea, the whole concept is we should all learn from each other. We're all in the same sort of business, and that's why there's conferences. That's why there's these webinar programs. That's why with colleagues, we're all very competitive, and everyone, we all on this call believes we are the best perfusionist. If we don't, we probably shouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, for the duration of my career, I've learned so much from so many different people, and those are the things that as you go on years and years of doing this matter. And I like sharing the information back. I think it's fun, and sometimes it's worthwhile.
That's amazing. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
I'm going to mute myself.
Interview yourself.
Thanks.
What do you think about?
Doing a great job.
Yeah. So one of our JCAM 88, he says that he thinks LV failure is more common than RV failure, and I'm not sure. We didn't really decide if it was on bypass or not. I don't know if he wants to elaborate on that. What do you think? LV failure more common than RV failure?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't say in what circumstance. I think it just depends. Are you talking about a patient that comes in with a STEMI, like we have now with this patient that's on ECMO that, had a stent put in down in Mexico while they were on vacation that closed down on the right coronary, and they had a big RV infarct and they couldn't get a wire across it. And finally they took the patient, and we took a patient and did 2-vessel bypass on the patient. And, now they're on ECMO, but that's right heart failure. No, I can't. I don't know. Jeff is a pretty smart guy, Jeff Campbell. Yeah. That's JCAM. But he's a really smart guy, and there may be some statistic that says that. My clinical experience, however, I don't think that I can appreciate that. I think that it just depends on the patient's pathology, where the lesion is, what the reason was. If you have poor myocardial preservation because of you're using, let's say, retrograde cardioplegia, retrograde coronary cardioplegia, and you put the thing in too deep and you miss the right coronary, you're definitely going to be in RV failure, not LV failure. And you see that sometimes with aortic valves and stuff. That's why when I do an aortic valve, I'm very picky about making them, and I'll get up and look myself. I want to see the cardioplegia coming out of both the left and right coronary ostia, because then I know that if we're given retrograde, I'm getting both ventricles, because I think that can happen to either side. So I can't say in my clinical experience that I would agree with that. But again, Jeff is a smart guy. There may be some statistical data he has that I'm not privy to.
So he does reply that it's in general that he thinks LV fails before RV. In general, not necessarily on bypass. And then,
in general. Well,
yeah.
I mean, it is a thicker muscle, right?
Right.
I mean,
that's
that's LV does more work. So, you have a lead. If you have disease on your left side, I can see that. Yeah. I just think it depends but you certainly have more opportunity for poor oxygenation or nourishment of the muscle on the left just because of its increased size, but it also has increased blood supply, but it depends on the degree of where the lesions are and the degree by which they are occlusive. Just depends on flow. I mean, it's all about flow.
Yeah. Do you have any particular algorithms or things that you look at just before you're ready whenever the surgeon looks at you and says, okay, turn the thing off? What kind of things do you look at before you actually start giving volume?
Oh, so come off bypass?
Yes, sir.
So let's just assume, like the case that I just finished, which was a 2-vessel cabbage on a, heavy set, but otherwise healthy female, relatively young. And, she had a perfectly normal heart to start with. Our cross clamp time was 22 minutes for a PDA LAD bypass. So no other reason for there to be a problem. So I took that patient. I got the SVR where I want it. I turned my flow down to about, 1,500, put a clamp across the venous line, filled the heart up until I saw no further increase in systolic pressure, which really I ran out of volume. We needed the venous line and flush all of it in because I hemoconcentrated the patient. Mm-hmm. And the patient came off bypass right away. I mean, it probably took all of, 10 seconds, 15 seconds maybe. If the patient is, a double valve, cabbage, maze, left atrial appendage clipping, and with, our cross clamp, we've given 3 doses of Delnido, I'm probably going to approach that a little bit differently. I don't want that patient, if I'm concerned at all, to have an increased afterload. So I'm going to want the SVR a little bit lower, probably range, and I'm going to tease that patient off bypass. So I'm going to, find a volume where I have pulsatility, and then I'm going to continue to reduce my flow and take deeper bites on my venous line, trying to maintain that pulsatility and see how they're going to do, and rely on anesthesia to do a TEE and give me an idea of how full the heart is or not. I mean, it's a look at the PA pressures if you have them. I mean, it is there's an art to it, certainly, to try and tease someone off bypass versus slamming somebody off bypass. So I just take into consideration, why are we here? What's the condition of this patient's heart? How bad have we abused them during this operation? And, is this a patient that has a hematocrit of 34, 35, and I could just take them right off bypass? They're relatively young, or are they 76 years old? I've had to give a couple of units of packed cells already. I know they're going to be coagulopathic, and there's going to be all these other issues. Maybe they started off with some pulmonary hypertension, maybe not primary pulmonary hypertension, but their PA pressures were high due to, congestive heart failure of some sort from their disease. I'm going to be a whole lot more gentle with that patient. Yeah. And, the best thing, I'll tell everybody this one thing. You can, and I know, Thomas, you do the same thing. I know, Becky, you do too. We all kind of do. I think we're all sort of trained in a certain way, and we've adapted, as we've been in practice. But I don't rely only on numbers, and I don't rely only on, I always question everything, especially the radial arterial line, if our pressure sucks, and it really shouldn't. So I know something's wrong. I try to compare it before we go on and all that, and look at, consider how bad the line might have looked before. But you get cold enough and you stay cold and you're clamped down, those lines just go bad. So, I don't want to rely on the surgeon either to say, hey, how does the heart look? Because, they sometimes can, wishful thinking, it doesn't look too bad, it looks pretty good, whatever. I'll get up and I'll look over their shoulder and I'll look at the heart myself and see how big does that thing really look? How snappy does it look? Snappy, are you getting that cleft in the RV where I know it's really empty? And I try to take a look at all the data that I have available to me, but most importantly, I depend on, jokingly, mine own eyes to, my lion eyes to tell me what I'm really seeing here and what it really looks like. And I can tell usually within the first 10 or 15 seconds if the patient's going to come off bypass or not, pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
It did. So I have a question for you about filling pressures. What do you feel? How do you feel about filling pressures? Which numbers do you use?
Well, there's normal filling pressures, and then of course, there's stuffing a patient because you're trying to get all the good volume in. And there's maneuvers you can do. You can dilate the patient. You can use reverse Trendelenburg. You can run the CVP up to, if the heart is normal, the CVP up to 20. Now, of course, they're sick enough; they may need a CVP of 20 just to get off. So I just, they'll mobilize that fluid, and the heart will react. Will deal with it. Their capacitance system will increase. They'll start diuresing. They'll do all the normal things that you do when you're a little hypervolemic with normal hemodynamics. But what do I think of them? I think that. I think you can seriously overfill a patient and hurt them if they're sick. And I think lighter is always better to a point. And I think that once you start getting into the rocket fuel, that you may as well stop the rocket fuel and go to mechanical support, whether it be balloon pump, Impella, or ECMO, whatever the case may be. Once you're looking at 12 mics of norepi, and you've got neo on, and you've got vaso on, I mean, the patient's going to struggle, and I don't see really any point in that. I think do something.
Yeah, what's rule number 1 of perfusion? Do you remember my rules? Rule number 1?
No, I do. I don't.
Rule number 1 is move, do something. Rule number 2,
move, do something.
Yeah, rule number 2 is cheat.
Yeah.
But we decided to change that. We decided to change that. We said, what do we call it? We called it, I can't remember what we called it, because it's kind of, people don't like when you use the word cheat.
Exaggerate?
No, it was...
maybe not cheat, maybe
it is meant,
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah,
I can't think of the word either.
Yeah,
that's a common word. I can't think of it.
Yeah.
I
don't know. I think we had a great talk today.
Embellish.
Oh yeah, I totally lied the whole thing. I made everything up.
Good.
Yeah.
So what did you? So your lectures today were on. Was treating hemodynamic. Well, you did the pressure is on weaning CPB. Right. What did you do first?
So first, I since Vicki wasn't here, I did sort of what I think is going to be her lecture for tomorrow, and that was pressures. It was more like general of pressures. It was kind of like today she was doing treating pressures, and tomorrow she was doing general pressures. So I just did general pressures. I tried to cover all the pressures in the heart. I didn't go as far down the arms, and show that, you could have different numbers down the arms or down the legs. I just stopped at the heart, the right ventricle, left ventricle, right atrium, left atrium, the wedge pressure, which is left atrial pressure, CVP, which is right atrial pressure, and what normals are according to the books, what normals are with a cardiac patient that's older. Those were the things I covered.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, I think that's great. The other thing too is we're talking about those radial lines. The first thing I do when I come off bypass, the very first thing I do is I look at that waveform, and if the waveform looks really good, I'm not really that concerned. But if it just doesn't look right to me, I check that mean pressure right away. I do have to move a clamp to make that happen. But I'll be in a hurry. I'll do it faster than I might normally if everything just looks fine. And I can't tell you how many times there has been, so many times I can't remember where the difference in systolic is 20 millimeters of mercury, but I've seen it 40 and 50 millimeters of mercury different. Mean pressure is way different. And they're sitting there treating this patient as if their blood pressure is low. And, it's struggling along at 77 on the radial, and they move it over to the other, and it's 160, 170. I've seen that happen many, many, many times. And they're just radial lines are just inherently unreliable. And, whatever line you have, whether it be a swan, it doesn't make any difference. Every line placement matters.
That's true. And, especially the radial, because first off, it's put in a position where it's going to be tied down. And then there's a question of, because it's tied down like that, is blood flow getting there to warm up the arm? Is that happening? Because it may be cold, and then it clamps down. What's it called? When the spasm. And,
spasms. Yeah.
And there's nothing better than a femoral artery, but except for when there's not.
You don't want to put femoral. You don't want to put femoral. You don't want to put femoral lines in everybody. There's right. Infection risk and bleeding risk and all the other things that can happen. Sometimes you need them, but they're no matter what we do to anyone, there's nothing that's benign. Mm-hmm. Everything carries a risk. Yeah.
What do you think?
Anyway, well, good. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, what do you think about using ejection fraction as a predictor of weaning from bypass? So the pre-op ejection fraction, using it as a predictor for your successful wean from bypass.
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely matters. You start off with an EF of 20 versus an EF of 50 or 60. You got an EF of 60, and it's a blue plate special 3-vessel bypass, or even just a straightforward aortic valve. And again, it all depends on, did I have good myocardial preservation? Right, did I get good distribution of this cardioplegia? There's a lot of things going on that matter as to whether or not the heart is going to continue to have that nice high ejection fraction. So yes, I think that really does matter. I think understanding the condition of the heart before you do your case is something that should be known by everybody. All right. Well,
yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody make any comments? Anybody say
there was
anything?
A few comments. JCam88, he.
That's Jeffrey Campbell.
Yeah, some great comments. Volume overload more so LV distension either during bypass, particularly during cross clamp or after cross clamp removal, with no ejection on peripheral VA ECMO.
But more so LV distension, either CPB regular during cross clamp with no ejection or peripheral VA. Absolutely. I know what he's saying here. He's basically saying that you get the LV, distended enough, and what's going to happen. Not only is it not going to contract well because you're past your peak of Starling curve, but you're also potentially, if there's other issues and you have some papillary muscle dysfunction, may create some MR. Now you've got yet another problem. Yeah. And you're going on bypass to do a mitral valve because they've got, moderate to severe MR.
Oh, so here's an interesting question for you.
How did I get so good looking?
Yes. We kind of lost you there. It looks like on the end of that comment. But there was an interesting thing. It says, what do you think about ventricular mass index to calculate cardioplegia dosing? I have an opinion on that, but you go and tell me your opinion.
No, I think our opinion is probably going to be the same. So I guess, first and foremost, what type of cardioplegia are you using? Okay. So you have to know that. Are you using Pledgisol? Are you using St. Thomas? Are you using custodial? Are you using Delnito? What are you using? So that's the first thing you're going to need to know. And then, clearly if you have a hypertrophied heart, it's not hard to just assume, I think reasonably, that heart is probably going to need a little more cardioplegia than a heart that is not hypertrophied. So we don't calculate ventricular mass index. I've never looked it up in the chart or anything else, but the concept, I think, makes sense. I think it seems intuitive, if you will. That's my thoughts. What are yours?
My thought is give cardioplegia very cold and until the heart stops, and then a little bit more.
And then give a little more just to be sure.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Can you calculate doses? You can calculate doses. There's a lot of things you can calculate. You can calculate how much bicarb that you should give, but it's still, in the end, you're just going to round up and give the whole bottle, or you're just going to give 25.
Well,
you know.
Right. That's very true. But I will say this, and that's actually a very good point. It brings up something of thought, at least in my head. And that is, I can tell you two things. One, you're not going to hurt anyone. What the hell is that all about? My birthday? That was the other day.
We're still celebrating birthday week.
Yeah. You will not do any harm by giving a little extra or even a moderate amount of extra cardioplegia. You will do harm underdosing your cardioplegia. Mm-hmm. So more is better. So if by the ventricular mass index, it said I needed 675 cc's of Del Nido, they're getting 1,200 whether they like it or not.
Yes.
And I'm going to give it at as long as they don't have any AI, if I'm going down the native coronaries, at as high a pressure and flow as I can to make sure that I get really good distribution. If I'm going retrograde with it and the aorta is not open, I've got the vent on and I am approximating to the best of my ability how much is coming back to that vent, through that vent, and I am haranguing the surgeon and asking, is the LV getting distended? Is the LV getting distended? Because I need to know that cardioplegia is getting up there.
Right. So one of these days I'm going to have to show you. One of these days, I'm going to have to show you my protocols for cardioplegia delivery that's in my book. It's pretty much the standard stuff. You know, you deliver at a certain rate. You should expect a certain rate of flow, and you should expect it to derive a certain pressure. And if it doesn't derive that pressure, and you're getting too high of a flow, it's not going where it needs to go. Or if
and that's going to depend on the size of the cardioplegia needle or the retrograde. The other thing about retrograde is you've got to make sure it's not in too deep. I do not like self-inflating balloons. I like the manual inflating balloons. And that's why I'm so careful about what's coming back through the aortic vent, or sump, whatever you want to call it. Because if I'm not seeing it coming back, I know there's something wrong. And I really, 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 really want to have to be measuring coronary sinus pressure, the pressure that it comes on the catheter itself, hooked up to a monitor. And I want to see that somewhere between, I like 40 to 60 is about what I like. Some people go a little lower than that, but I don't know too many people that go over 60, but I like 40 to 60. And I want to see that bump happen as soon as I turn it on. And that gives me a good feeling that they have a good seal.
Right. Well, we'll have to talk about my cardioplegia delivery protocols, because it's just like that. It's when you're using a manual inflate versus the self-inflating, you want to drive the pressure up quickly. You got to get the flows up fast to get that balloon inflated, because until that balloon inflates, it's not going there. And I think that a lot of people are so concerned about rupturing a coronary sinus that they will underflow and under pressure, and you don't realize that the blood's not getting there. And so there's, and I think the other thing I find that's really, really cool, like when you talk about the people that have the most experience tend to do things very similarly. And everybody thinks they do things differently, but they're really doing things very similarly. And it's mostly because we've tried everything else and we know what works. And, and I don't know. So when you know that you've got to get that pressure up fast, but to try to tell somebody that, so I try to teach people that. They're very worried about other problems that they can happen, but you're controlling things. You have your finger on the knob, you're controlling it, and you can see things before they happen. I think experienced perfusionists anticipate and inexperienced perfusionists react. Yeah.
Yes. Now,
I got told that a lot growing up.
This. I understand. Yeah, it's true. Can people pre-order your book?
Not yet. I have to actually,
we can plug it.
Yeah, I have to finish it. Yeah.
When are you going to finish it?
I want to be done with it by the end of this year.
When are you going to finish it?
By the end of this year. We've got what?
Good.
Say 10 months left? 9 months left?
Well, I'm going to do a book. I'm going to do a book review here online
Awesome.
On the program with it.
Yeah. Do you think it's too much?
I think that'd be great. We'll go over the chapters.
That's right. Do you think it's too much? I'm calling it the textbook of cardiopulmonary perfusion.
No, I think it's fantastic.
And I
think it's fantastic.
It's a living document, and it's open to criticism and also, people who have better ideas. I'm always open. Everything I write, everything I do is open to a better idea.
Well, and compliment too. So, criticisms and new and other ways of looking at things is fine, but maybe you'll get more compliments than not. All right. So I know we went over the other night, and I always go over. That's my habit. And we went over, and Vicki went over. So if you would be so kind, maybe we can get out early, if that'd be okay with you, and you can wrap this up, close us out,
Sure.
And wish everybody a good evening, and people can get to dinner or whatever they'd like to do, and I can rest my throat.
Yes. Feel better. I know that I'm feeling better now. So, and I think Dr. Matauer said he was feeling better.
Yes. He's sitting right here. There.
That's good. Oh, hey.
Hey, what's up?
How are you?
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to let you close this out.
All right. Okay.
Thomas, and I'll just wait for you.
Joe, it's great. It's always a pleasure to see you. And I wish you that you get better quicker. And again, happy birthday week.
Thank you. And then tomorrow our program is, it's going to be Vicki Carlyle, right?
Right.
And don't forget to tell people to make sure that they subscribe and like us and buy our app. Did you tell everybody to buy our app?
Yes. I wasn't as good as you were about selling the app, but I'm going to work on that. We'll put an ad in my book.
Okay, Seth. Maybe if you use the app, it would help.
Yes. I do use it. I love it.
Okay,
I think it's
very
the best
good.
app I've ever used.
All right.
Thanks, Joe. We'll see you later.
I'm looking forward to seeing. Good deal. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Thomas, thanks for sitting in for me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you for trusting me.
Work.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Becky, too. She's not on anymore.
She's already gone. Bye,
she got
Becky.
called for something.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to have to find out what that was all about. And give the guys, David and Magic, my compliments for always putting together such a great looking program with all of the graphics that are involved with this.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a very nice
Thank you.
facility.
Be safe.
Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Godspeed.
Bye.
Bye. Sure. We want to thank everybody for watching today's show. I hope that that there was a lot learned here. And if you have any comments or questions, if you want to take umbrage with anything I said, anything that happened tonight, post your comments. If you liked what you learned today, what you saw, be sure to like and subscribe. It does help us out. It sends the word out everywhere so that more and more perfusionists can have the opportunity to come here and give their input with us. And that's really what we're here for. We're a collaboration. And I really love perfusion. I love working with Joe. I'm so happy to be here. Our producers, Magic and David in the back, that put on this fantastic show with this beautiful background that we have, and the ability to do just amazing things in this studio. I'm just very happy to be here, and I hope everybody has a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Vicki Carlisle's show, 8:00 in the morning. I wonder if I'll be here. I might be doing cases, but Vicki Carlyle will be here, and she is phenomenal. She's a great educator. This talk is going to be good. You take everything that I talked about today, and she's going to be able to take that and create disease conditions and give you fixes. She's brilliant at what she does, and the way her explanations and drawings and everything. So be sure to show up tomorrow at 8:00 in the morning, and we will talk to you all later. So we're heading out. Goodbye, everybody. Good night.